Reaganomics versus Bidenomics. Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Insights brought to you by Ainslie Bullion and the Gold and Silver Standard. Today, we welcome back Alex, who's been looking at government policy and particularly administration policies, past and present, and sort of seeing the similarities and differences that they have and what we can sort of expect from situations in the past and situations where we are now and what we can expect going forward. So thank you for digging into all of that today. Alex, how are you going?
I'm going very well, thank you. How are you?
Good. Yeah, you sort of took us on a bit of a journey today, but I think probably the best place to start is just with that definition, that big picture overall definition. What is Bidenomics as the current, president of the United States says that's the term they're using, and what was Reaganomics as our sort of historical comparison?
So I guess a historical comparison we need to start with is Biden is starting to pitch for his 2024 election, and he needs a platform. And the economy everyone's been quite down on it. Real wages have dropped significantly since in the last 29 months, I think about 3.1% in America. And he's looking for a platform to go into the next election. So he's called it Bidenomics. And it's kind of a throwback to Reaganomics, but they couldn't be more different. So if you look at Bidenomics, it was fiscal expansionary economics. He spent a lot of money, and he spent a lot of money until around December 2022. The House of Reps got back with Republicans, and they've tried to temper down now a lot of the spending. So they've only just lifted the debt ceiling, but that, as we know, took 6 months of a lot of negotiation. So it really held back a lot of the spending. But then Reaganomics, the difference there is both Biden and Reagan were in inflationary periods. But Reagan came in during peak inflation. Biden perhaps caused peak inflation. So they're a little bit different. So Reagan...
But the Bidenomics might be trying to solve the problem that Bidenomics created. Right. Yeah.
Maybe.
Gotcha.
Very possibly. So you've got Reaganomics came in about 1981 with the 4 pillars, and I'm not going to try and guess them. It was pulling back government spending, expanding monetary policy. It was trickle-down economics, so giving tax cuts. So the top marginal tax cut went from 70%, I think, to 28%. So he was trying to control inflation by dropping government spending, which is fiscal, and then create, economic expansion later on through trickle down, which you and I spoke to, basically creates asset bubbles and a bit of it creates a wider gap with the wealth. So your wealth gap becomes larger, but
it is interesting because it seems like from that description, you've got effectively trying to balance a little bit of push and pull going on, where you've got both aspects at play at once. It's not just all flooding the economy with money. It's also showing restraint while expanding in other areas, which kind of makes sense to me. I suppose the recent example of Reaganomics, or that trickle down economics that you're talking about, that was something that we heard Trump talking about a lot. So was there sort of a parallel going on there under the previous administration?
Yeah, so, Reaganomics, like we just said, was monetary expansion with fiscal contraction. But what we've actually just seen in 2022, realistically, is the Trump trickle-down economics, which is supply-side monetary economics, just like what Reagan was doing, where he dropped, I think, the tax rate in the US from 35% to 21% for corporates, in hope that these companies would invest in new factories, and that trickle down would come through in wages. Now, whether or not that worked under Reagan or Trump, I don't think history shows that it did particularly well. But what it has actually done is you've got monetary policy that can take 3 to 6 years to work. So you cut corporate tax rates in 2019, and it takes a year for the companies to pay tax. So now it's 2020. Now 2020, they think we're going to invest some money. So what are we going to invest it in? They invest in 1 to 3 year projects. So suddenly we're in 2022, and you've got Trump trickle-down expansionary monetary policy hitting an economy at the same time that you have Biden fiscal expansion hitting the economy. So the difference with Reaganomics was you had two opposite forces, whereas in 2022, you probably have both monetary expansion and fiscal expansion going on, and it's only just stopped. And Biden is now trying to take claim to this, and I would suggest that that's not quite what happened.
Not quite accurate. So just to clarify that then, so you're effectively saying that how you see it, what Biden's actually done, we probably have these policies moving in the same direction. So the previous administration and the current administration, sort of policies moving in the same direction, but do you think that potentially amplifies? So is that like you've got sort of two ways backing each other up, trying to sort of achieve the same thing, but through different means, and you end up with the amplified inflation? Is that what we've been seeing? And you know, that to me seems that there's potentially unintended consequences sort of scenario. Is that how you see it?
I would think, looking back in history, there's not been many cases where you've got a monetary policy which is sort of 3 to 6 years to hit, you know, properly an economy, with fiscal policy, which
well, that'd be much quicker.
Much quicker, because you've got a tax rate for you and I, or GST, the extra GST if they do it the other way, and it hits us as consumers immediately. So it puts the brakes on us. So that is meant to be a 3 to 12 month effect. And like I said, monetary policy 3 to 6 years. So 2022 looks like one of those years where that first wave of Trump trickle down supply side monetary expansion hit. And then it was amplified, exactly like what you said, with the fiscal policy from Biden over the top. So that rapid expansion in inflation seems to be from, two policies that acted in exactly the same direction.
I wonder, because it seems to me that when you look at these sort of, think about an administration lasting for 4 or 8 years, or depending, you know, like these longer periods of time, when you get a new administration in, you've often got a lot of new people who are in these important decision-making roles who may not really, like, they probably think each time that they're effectively reinventing the wheel, you know, that this is their strategy and this is what they're doing. They may not even really be looking at fully understanding the previous and the consequences of the previous strategy, particularly if it was a strategy that was multi-year, because they're probably going, well, we're in to do something now, and, you know, throw everything out from before. Is that, you know, that at play here?
I think it's Biden trying to correct what Trump did. Trump gave it to the rich, on the, you know, the companies, and Biden said, well, this isn't fair. And, you know, fair enough, because the trickle down takes years to come through. And, you know, historically, there's some argument that it doesn't really come through that well either. But so he's gone middle to bottom up, gone fiscal. And so you've potentially got the trickle hitting at the same time as the expansion, or as the tax cuts and extra spending hitting the. So, it all hits at the same time. No one's thinking about what the other person's doing. And I would say right now, inflation is coming down. That is probably more a fluke in some ways. You know, you've got all the banks jacking up rates, but we know the rates in the US, because of 30 years mortgages, don't seem to temper it quite as quickly. And like you said before, I'm not sure we spoke about it on this, but we spoke about it before, where trickle-down economics actually expands assets. So you've got expansion on assets happening at the same time as monetary contraction with the RBA and all especially in the US. So there's those increases are not controlling. They're just tempering what would have otherwise happened, I'd say.
And that's really interesting. I'd like to maybe even expand a little bit on that with this idea of timing, because it feels to me that the market, when I talk about the market, people, you know, commentators, whoever, generally are really struggling with this period of time to understand what's going on, because we haven't had those big crashes. Everyone's been predicting a recession for a long time. I mean, we've talked about that. Potentially, we've already had the recession, like lots of different discussions going on around that. It kind of makes sense through this framework that you've just described of why we haven't seen that, because you've had the short term and the long term, like that, those ways.
The assets expansions are just really hitting.
and pushed it further forward. So do you see a timeline for the end of that then? Like, are we coming to the end of that period of time now, or is it still years
think
away?
so. You would definitely think so, right? Because you've got all the building going on. You've got stay-at-home people, at least in the commercial building space, that's definitely coming to an end. And we've looked at the Chinese data coming out at the moment,
which is terrible.
It's terrible data. So it seems, I mean, like there's a bit of a train wreck coming, but who knows? But to me, it looks like this just hasn't happened before, where you've had such enormous expansion happening simultaneously. So what does the actual hangover look like? I'm not really sure we've seen it in history that much.
And that's a really important point, because people are always looking for the history, doesn't repeat, it rhymes analogy is used all the time, and people are just looking for this parallel. But it's possible that we just haven't combined things in this way before, so the outcome can be different to what we've experienced in the past.
I think this is a very different, it's a wave on a wave. And I always describe to my business associates that money is always a wave. You spend money and you feel like, and then the tide goes in and you feel like you have no money, but the next wave is always bigger. And this just feels like a mighty big wave that's about to come in here, because this just hasn't happened before.
I love that analogy, and we might end on that one. Alex, thank you for that. I think it's really that they're quite difficult concepts, and I think you've really broken them down in a way that people can digest. So I appreciate that. Thanks for that.
No problem. Thank you for having me. It's always fun looking at economics.
It certainly is. I certainly enjoy it. Thanks for everyone for watching. Remember, if you have any questions or comments, reach out on those social platforms. That's us for today. We'll be back tomorrow with Ben Simpson from Collective Shift. He's going to catch us up to date on some things in the crypto landscape, so something a little bit different. But until then, have a great rest of the day, everyone.